Pretty good. Pretty good. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Black Magic Craft. So today is part 2 to last week's episode where I built this little farmhouse. And this episode I'm going to paint it up, do some embellishments and some finishing details to make it look more good, or better good, awesome. Make it look nice. This project started out as a farmhouse, but the more I worked with it and started weathering things and painting things, it turned a little bit more dark and abandoned looking and a little bit more like a hag's hut. So take it or leave it. This little project could be your farmhouse, it could be your hag's hut, it could be your hunter's lodge, it could be whatever. I mean, the basic principles from the build can be used on just about anything. It's just really a starting point for you to build stuff. And the painting techniques is just stuff that made it look more weathered. So this is gonna be up to you how much or how little of that weathering you wanna do. And yeah, honestly, it's just a cool little building, and let's finish it up. All right guys, I skipped ahead here and I've got my little cottage farmhouse thing base coated with my Black Magic Craft base coat, which is, you know, just that mix of Mod Podge and black paint. I do have an episode dedicated to that if you've missed it and are curious about it. The other thing I have done since the last episode is I decided to add a little bit of embellishments here because I got some green stuff in the mail finally. So I was just messing around with it, did my first test on a little base here, and I had a little bit mixed up left over, and I thought it might be fun to do some little features on this cottage. And because I'm going the route of having this thing look really worn and weathered, I wanted to make it look like this thing has been standing for a while and is kind of one with nature, so to speak. So I sculpted 2 little features out of green stuff. One is this little swallow's nest at the roof with a couple eggs in there, which I thought was a fun little detail. And then these little fungi mushroom things that, you know, you see growing on old trees and old buildings. I thought that might be a little fun feature right at ground level, because think about it, you got this wood roof sitting in wet ground and fungi is sure to grow. Another thing that I'm going to add is I want this to have a set of antlers above the door, and I found these in my box of bits from my mini haul. It's a nice set of antlers, and I am going to paint these separately. I'm going to spray paint them and paint them up and then affix them above the door later. What I did to both facilitate working as well as mounting them later is with my Proxon rotary tool, I drilled a little hole in the back of this and I 5-minute epoxied this push pin. So this will allow me to pin it to a cork to work on it for paint, but then afterwards I will just pin it right through to the foam and glue it, and I will be sure that it will stay there. So now I'm going to actually start painting this, and essentially you only have 2 main colors, which is a brown for the wood and a kind of tan for the stucco. There'll be some, you know, obviously little detail colors on these features I've added, but for the most part it's just those 2, and I'm going to use just this basic brown for the first coat of wood and this suede for the first coat of stucco. I'm going to see how it looks. I'll probably do some dry brushing, some weathering, and definitely a bunch of washes. But we're going to start with these. I personally, on something like this, prefer to paint out all the woodwork and then cut in the color on the stucco, because as I see it, it actually makes sense that if my brush hits the wood with some of the stucco color, that actually makes sense because the stucco is applied to the building afterwards, and some of that could actually work its way onto these timbers so it won't look weird. However, if there's light dabs sorry, if there's dark dabs of the dark brown on the light stucco, that doesn't make any sense because there'd be no reason for the wood color to transfer the stucco. So that's kind of the principle I have when painting it. So I'm going to skip ahead now to when that is all completely on, and we'll take a look how it looks after. So now my base coat is complete. I got the brown on all the wood and timbers and the suede on the stucco. I also primed out these little antlers with a white spray primer because they're metal, and that's drying, and then later I'll be able to put a wash on these and make them look good. When I painted this, I didn't bother, avoiding these little mushroom caps and the bird nest stuff because that'll be the last thing I paint out with a detail brush. Yeah, just basic two-tone colors, touch up any bad kind of overbrushings of the suede onto the brown. And now it's time to start highlighting and weathering the wood. And I'm gonna do that by dry brushing on this tan. Now this tan is a little bit darker, but very similar to the suede that I used on the stucco. But this is, I don't want to go that bright on it, but this is going to highlight all the edges, and it's going to give it that kind of gray weathered look. And of course, like everything I make, it's going to get a wash after that's going to get into the deep crevices with like black to, really give it some depth. So when you're doing this, there's two things to keep in mind. One is that you want to really make sure that this is a true dry brushing. You want to get off as much of this paint as you can. You don't want to have any smears when you're doing this. You really want it to only be hitting the highlights and the edges. You don't want to have too many like big streaks. So work off a lot of that excess paint and go lightly and carefully at first, because too much of this will actually look kind of strange. The other nice thing though is that because this color is very similar, just darker, to this stucco tan, it doesn't matter if you get any of this onto the stucco, so you don't have to be careful about that at all. The face of the timbers, you want to go fairly minimal and light, so you just highlight the grain. But when you get to the actual edges, any hard corners, you can let that go on a bit heavier, and that'll really highlight these edges and give it a little bit more 3D pop to it. So I'm just going to finish dry brushing this all out because it's basically just that, and we'll skip ahead to the next step. So now all this wood has been highlighted with a dry brush. It's all weathered looking, and before I do the washes, now I'm going to paint out these details. So I got a few different colors here. For the nest, I'm going to use this Reaper blonde hair. It's 09257. Going to use just the pure white for the eggs, and I think for these fungi mushrooms I'm going to use this fair highlight. It's like a flesh tone, 09048. So we'll see how this goes. Get a bit of water on the brush so it's not too thick, and let's try to get this painted here. I figured this might have a nice kind of straw color to it. It's very difficult to move this around and paint it so that it all stays in frame. So bear with me. And I think that's a pretty serviceable straw bird's nest color. Try to get in some of these little spots where I missed. Definitely don't want to get any of this transferring onto the wood timbers, but yeah, that looks pretty good. So now I'm gonna paint out these eggs white. I'm realizing what would have been really nice is if I painted these eggs before anything else and did like a blue speckling, like with a toothbrush or a paintbrush, but it's gonna get everywhere, so I don't think I want to do that now. Okay. This I'm gonna have to pull a little closer to me off camera to get done. All right, so now that those are actually painted out, I think it looks pretty cool. Probably pretty small on camera so you can't see it. It'll show up better in the pictures. And now I'm gonna try this flesh tone on this fungi. Now, I don't really know if this will be appropriate. I'm just gonna experiment a bit and try it. I think what I'm gonna do is paint these out flesh tone and then highlight the edges with a line of white. Okay, so I'm gonna finish these up close to my face off camera, and then we will skip ahead to it being dry and we'll go from there. All right, and we're back. So bird's nest and eggs are painted out. I did decide to do the blue speckling on the eggs, so they had that kind of cool swallow, pheasant, whatever. I don't know, the eggs that have blue speckles on them. I like the way it looks. I did it, and then I just touched up the nest around it. Did my little fungi mushrooms here with the flesh tone and highlighted them with a white. And now it is time to do the wash. And I'm gonna, just like the painting, treat the main building and these details separately. I'm going to do my generic black wash, like my cheap homemade one, on the building, and then I'm gonna use some better pre-bought washes on these little features because they just work a little bit better on tiny items. So for the black wash, I still have some left from my big batch that I made months ago that I've been using on various projects on the channel. I'm just gonna shake this up and I'm gonna pour some into one of these little plastic shot glasses. And these shot glasses, by the way, buy them from the dollar store. They are very, very handy when crafting. Little disposable plastic cups, great for holding water and all sorts of stuff. I'm gonna take some blue poster tack here and I'm going to stick it right down onto there because we all know I will knock it over if I don't. So just gonna take this and I'm gonna start putting it on my building. I think because I'm at the bottom of my batch, this may be a little darker than I would normally like. You know what I mean? Because this bottle has been sitting a while, and even though you shake it up every time, the pigment is going to settle at the bottom. So as the bottle empties, the wash gets a little bit more dark and intense, but you know what? That's okay. I'm gonna put it on, see how it works out, and then I can always add some more highlighting dry brushes to kind of tone down the black. But I want this building to look weathered and old. I want to be able to use this as like an abandoned building, so I'm okay if it's a lot grimier than say something that was still in use. And also a lot of the time the wash goes on really dark and then dries. I know the camera, the lighting is not great to see that, but I'm gonna go over, do the whole thing, and we'll see how it ends up. And you'll notice when I'm putting this on, I'm trying to dab it as opposed to actually painting it on like this when possible. The reason for that is just that the wash can rehydrate your paint, and if it's really saturated and you start dragging your brush across it, there is a small risk of rehydrating the paint and smearing it and getting something that looks kind of smudgy. So try to dab it when I can. Do these roofs now. And you can tell I'm not afraid to really get a lot on there. So I'm just going to continue with this, and I'm going to let it dry mostly, and then we'll come back and see how it looks. So I've waited about an hour for the wash to dry enough that I can move on, and it is mostly dry now. There might still be some wet stuff right at the bottom where it's pooling. And overall, the wash came out pretty good. I'm happy with the way all the wood looks, but two things. One is that I had painted these details, the nest and the mushrooms, ahead of time in a very light color. And when I was doing the wash, it was very easy to avoid them and brush in around it, and that wasn't a problem. But what I didn't account for was the fact that the wash is so watery that it would actually just like wick up onto these surfaces and pool down onto them, and that's what happened, and it stained them and turned them pretty dark, way darker than I wanted, because I don't want a black wash on these. So I did have to go in and quickly just touch up the paint on those. So in the future, if I do these kind of like really small, really bright embellishments on a building that's getting a heavy black wash, I think I will paint them after the wash has dried. The other thing is, I expected this to happen. The stucco came out really dark, which is fine for a really old weathered building, but it may be darker than you want, and I actually want to lighten it up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this suede, which is the original color I painted it with, not the slightly darker one that I did the wood dry brushing with, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to do a dry brushing on all of the high points of this stucco, and this will just brighten it up. It'll also give a lot more depth to this, pretty strong texture that I've used here. And I'm going to play it by ear and see if, when this is all done, if I think that this has lightened it up enough, and if I want to make it pop a little bit more, I might do a second very minimal dry brushing with some off-white. But you can already see that's lightening it up a bit and making it look a little bit better. I'm going to move forward and I'm going to do all of that stuff, and then once that's done, I'm going to move on to the washes on these details. Okay, be back in a second. So the dry brushing is complete. I did also do a tiny bit more on the wood, just on the very, very edges to kind of make it pop a little bit. And the suede dry brushing on this stucco, when I did it, I wasn't worried about getting too deep into the corners. I just kind of got the more general middle area of it, which makes sense because all these little corners would be dirtier and grimier. And so I did that, and then I took some vanilla and very minimally just hit the very highest points, again, further into the center of these spots. And it's made this texture really, really pop, and I think look pretty damn good. So now I can move on to doing the washes on these two items. And I think for these fungi, I'm going to use this Citadel Seraphim Sepia. It's kind of like this reddish brown. And again, I'm going to take my sticky tack and I'm going to stick this bottle to my surface because I don't want to knock over this expensive tiny little bottle of wash. So I don't know exactly how this is going to turn out, but we're going to try. So I'm going to take a bit of this and put it on my mushrooms. And I think this is going to look pretty good. And I'm just going to go underneath just to make sure I get some of that. I think those are looking excellent. And I can probably get away with actually using the same wash on the bird's nest. The brown is probably appropriate. Kind of start highlighting the little bit of texture I was able to do in the green stuff with a wire brush, and hopefully make it look like a believable little swallow's nest. I'm debating whether or not I should do this on the eggs. And I think I'm going to do it very lightly. What I'm going to do too is I'm just going to dab it off on the eggs so that it's just very subtle. Just so it's not a bright white. There. I think that works pretty good. I have my little antler set here that I've painted white, and I think I'm going to give this the same sepia wash and see how this looks. I think it'll be appropriate for an old set of bones. You know what, that's spinning on there, so I'm just gonna hold the pin. This piece would be a perfect candidate to just dip, but I don't actually have a big container of this wash to do that with. If you got your army painter shades, this would be perfect just to dip in there. And I think this is gonna look really good. Just gotta make sure I get it all so there isn't like a bright white dot somewhere. I think I want to take some of this green, this, we call it Athonian, just a green Citadel wash. And I want to use this to do some kind of grimy weathering. I want to add this where I think that, you know, this building may have been very wet over the years. Definitely around the fungi would make sense. And if I get some of this on the fungi, I think that's fine. And all along the bottom edge where this wood would have been sitting very close to ground level. And it looks really good right now. We'll see how it dries, if it really shows through. Sometimes a wash on something this dark doesn't really show up once it's dried, but we're gonna try. Same thing on this side. Well, this is what happens when you have a roof that goes all the way to the ground. You start to get kind of like moldy, mossy stuff growing on the bottom. Same thing along the back here. These timbers that are sitting right at ground level would be fairly saturated in water. And I can even get away with putting some of this right in the corners where dirt and grime would pool up around the edges in each one of these stuccoed areas. Same thing on the front. This door would definitely be really saturated in it, which would explain why it's rotted out. And I think that's really gonna sell the story of this old little farmhouse cottage. So just gotta wait for, again, the washes to dry, especially the ones on these antlers, so I can then go and glue them in place. So I've let this sit for about half an hour, which isn't long enough for all the wash to completely dry. It's still wet in some spots, but it's long enough for me to move on to the next and almost last step. And the mushrooms are looking awesome. Bird's nest looks good. Now I want to attach the set of horns to the front of this building, and these are dry enough that I can handle them. So because this is a foam structure, it works out really nicely that I have epoxied this pin onto here, and I can just actually poke this through and get it where I want, and that's going to keep it pretty damn strong, but I still want to glue it. So inside here, this pin extends. I don't want that to extend all the way in, so that, I don't know, if you reach in there, you're not poking yourself. So I'm going to cut off the excess of this pin here, and then I'm going to glue this in place with some 5-minute epoxy. I really love this stuff. It's really strong, and it's perfect for something like this. So I'm not going to need very much, although it's hard to mix a really small amount, so I'm going to be left with a lot of leftovers here, but that's okay. This stuff is from the dollar store, and I have like 20 tubes of it in my cupboards because it's so useful for water effects and different things, and is so cheap. So I'm just going to really mix this up. It's important when using 5-minute epoxy that you're really, really well mixed, because obviously it's a chemical reaction that causes it to harden. Okay, so here I'm just going to take some of this epoxy and put it over the pin as well as the flat back area of the skull. And then move this out of the way so I don't make a mess. Find the hole that I just poked and place my skull. I actually, by the feel of it, should have left that pin cut a little bit longer so it poked out a bit in the back, and then I could have glued the pin, but I think this is going to be plenty strong. I can actually squeeze it into the foam a little bit and indent it. So that's basically it. I'm going to leave this upright to dry, like for that glue to set on those horns, and then I'm going to finish the whole piece by spraying, a nice heavy coat of this Minwax fast drying polyurethane. It'll seal the piece, it'll enhance the color, and it'll give it a bit of a wet look to kind of really increase that weathering. And then I'm going to call it done. So let's take a look at some finished photos. So there you have it, guys. That is how you can complete a fairly simple building build. Like I said, the build I did in a couple of hours last Saturday, and then today I did all the painting and finishing in, again, another couple hours. So this is definitely a project that you can complete over a weekend or a few evenings, whatever. It's not an intimidating project. You guys should just try it out. If you've never built anything this complicated out of foam, and when I say complicated, it's not that complicated. If you've never built anything, above dungeon tiles, this is an excellent way for you to start. I want to take a moment this episode too to give a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. You guys have basically been the main reason that this channel since the new year has been going consistently. Video every single week, rain or shine, I always get something every Friday. And it's because I know I have the support of you guys, and I know that I need to deliver on that support. I don't want to just slack off now because you guys have helped me out so much that I got to continue the help back to you. Also, over the past 2 or 3 weeks, the actual amount of people supporting has gone up quite a bit. We got a lot of new faces in the Patreon fellowship group. The fellowship is the private Blackmagic Facebook group that's for people who pledge $5 or more a month, and it is quickly becoming my favorite place to hang out and share work. It's where people can ask me questions directly and get detailed answers. We brainstorm ideas as a group, we offer creative criticisms, we come up with ideas for videos, and it's a really excellent place to hang out, especially since it's so small. Everybody's voice gets heard, and it's just a really great little group. And I just want to say thanks to all of my members on there and all of my supporters. You guys are awesome. If you yourself want to take part in that or want to help support Blackmagic Craft, you can head over to Patreon and pledge there and become a member of the group, and I would love you for it. Also, if you want to support Blackmagic Craft in another way that is just as helpful but also benefits you greatly, you can head over to blackmagicraft.ca. There I have my essential equipment store, and that's where I post and give information on all the tools and supplies that I use regularly. You can direct link click on those to Amazon and purchase those, knowing full well that you get the exact stuff that I use and recommend. And those purchases are done through my affiliate account, so I get a commission on those sales as well as anything else you buy after clicking those links. So that's another great way that you can support the channel. If you aren't already a subscriber, and I mean, why the hell are you not when I'm making stuff like this every Friday? Come on, hit subscribe, hit that like button, drop me a comment below. I love hearing your guys' comments. I still try to respond to just about every one if I can, and I read every single one, and they make my days better every day. So I love your comments. And what else is is that all the things? Those are all the, is that it? Is that it? I think that's it. I probably forgot something. Well, anyways, guys, can't wait to see you guys again next week. Cheers, happy crafting. I hope you have a good game.